Welcome everybody to the Copper Queen Library virtual programs, and welcome to Julie Swarstad Johnson and her first book, Pennsylvania Furnace, which is just a beautiful collection of poems. And I'm so excited that we are going to be listening to you read tonight from this and possibly some other work. And Julie is the senior librarian
Specialist, yeah.
specialist at the U of A Poetry Center, which is actually one of my favorite places on the planet. I have added that library to favorite spots that I think are really important to visit when they reopen. Not just because of the honor of place of all of the books of poetry, but because of the way that they have integrated poetry into K-12 education practices, poetry into the classroom, but also highlighting printed matter and letterpress and the way that poetry can be exalted on the page typographically and through design. The art of it, of not just the written word, but the presentation of it, the displays, the collection, the permanent collection, and also the legacy of the poets and the people who have worked at that center since its creation. I think it's a remarkable place that is one of the hotspots for poetry in the country. So we are so lucky to live close by, and I just want to give that plug. Also, the U of A Poetry Center is doing the Global Poetry Vaccine Project, which we are a satellite partner of, and have the writing prompts and the cards with instructions on the balcony of the Copper Queen Library. As well, I distributed them at the vaccine pod last Thursday and will be again. So take advantage of that project. It's really phenomenal. And with that, I would like to welcome Julie Swarstad Johnson.
Thank you so much, Allison. And I want to start by thanking the Copper Queen Library and thanking Allison in particular for inviting me to talk to you this evening. Bisbee is a place that I love, although I haven't lived there. I've spent time there, and it's a place that I'm just fond of. And the Copper Queen Library is amazing in all the programming that it provides in its collection and just everything that it does. So go check out the library, make an appointment to come browse. So like Allison said, I'll be reading to you from Pennsylvania Furnace. This book, again, it's really nice to be here with you reading. This book came out at the end of 2019. And I was able to do some readings at the end of that year and then the beginning of 2020. But then the pandemic hit and all kinds of things got canceled. And so this is actually the first time that I've read from this book, I think, since February of last year. So it's really a treat to get to come back to it and continue to share it with people. So I'll be just reading poems from throughout the book and just to get you started. So it's a book about leaving your home place, moving somewhere different and trying to understand that new place through learning about history, through being on the land and just paying attention to what makes a place what it is. I'm originally from Peoria, which is part of Phoenix, and have lived in Tucson for many years, but I moved to central Pennsylvania for my master's degree in creative writing, lived there for a few years and then ended up moving back. And so this book is really about that experience of changing landscapes, going somewhere that's very different and just trying to come to grips with what that is. Central Pennsylvania has this rich legacy of iron production. So in the 19th century, it was a major iron producing region. This is kind of before steel came along. So it was much smaller communities producing iron together through iron furnaces, which are large stone stacks. They would be surrounded by buildings, but in this place, iron could be made. So you'll hear about that through these poems. And I think thinking about Bisbee and its rich history of mining, I hope that even though it's a different history, that there are some resonances there of interest. So this is the first poem in the book. What the gaps reveal at Swadera Furnace. In every cut opened between the blocks layered to make the high, straight sides of this furnace stack. In every gap, widened as the wooden buildings fell away, burned or rotted or hauled off to raise a barn or house. In the waves of moss woven over smoke stains on the smooth angles of these stones. In every tiny shadowed opening along the face of this abandoned thing, spiders flex, legs limber and loose, small bodies visible where the light trickles in. Before I know their presence, I know the stack's shadow around me. The forest only a century old, resurrected after the woodcutters turned its height into charcoal, into smoke settled in the folds of children's clothing, into a column of cloud, like God leading his people out of Egypt, centered above the furnace day and night, as an exodus of cooled iron threaded out between the hills on muleback. And when the charcoal or ore veins or business sense ran out, when the wagons loaded with earthenware pots, a cast iron pan, the family Bible turned for the cities. The last heavy tone of the casting bell lengthened in the evening air, shivering the webs laced between the stones, even then. When I draw closer to the stack's high sides, when I step into the casting arch and crouch, peer up through that opening, once filled with the crucible's steady heat, I can hear them, host of silent voices praising every shadow. I can hear the noiseless song of the multitude, of the spiders living on what we left behind, finding use, not in the thing itself, but in what it opened, the gaps in its story. Greener than. How to explain it, except to say I couldn't understand how there wasn't another Ace Hardware until Lewistown. And Lewistown was an unfathomable name at the bottom of the mileage signs along one of maybe two main routes through the central Pennsylvania town. How to explain, except to say I came from a place where the big box stores are legion, where the Arizona desert was bulldozed over decades to make mile after mile of intersections that repeat themselves with only minor variation, a geography of void and plenty, anything available, if not at this store, then the next or the next. How to explain, except to say I thought someone had cut off part of the sky, what was left a small drab covering that had me in tears when the rain didn't stop for a week. And those hills they sometimes called mountains, the trees obscuring everything underneath into ominous shade. How to explain? When one day what was at first a bird with a rust-colored chest bounced through the grass and the word robin lit up in my brain, some wire falling into place between description and experience, the joy of it flashing madly like bulbs on an old movie theater sign. The local words ridge and gap and run became little maps, rudimentary phrases I could repeat to myself, the way I'd once learned buongiorno and per favore, beginner words that could act as charms in a new place, magic keys that sometimes open doors and sometimes do nothing at all except give you a reason to keep on going. Run and ridge and gap, all that water alive in the landscape, all those strange long hills shouldering through the dusk and the places the water cuts through them, the highway on stilts high above the houses in gray twilight, and the solitary owl, wild, hurtling form, merging with the solid absence of the trees. So we'll move back from those kind of present day, the present speaker who's me dealing with being in a new place. We'll go through some of the poems that focus more on the history and kind of trying to understand the iron making, these communities, how people lived, and how that shaped the landscape. Something that came up in that first poem is that in the 19th century, much of the forest around where I lived and really across the United States in different places was cut down to make charcoal for these industrial enterprises like iron making. And so to me, I'm coming from Arizona, I see these trees and they seem totally different and huge and like they've been there forever. But in reality, they're second growth forest. Things had really been clear cut. So just trying to understand those layers of history across the landscape. So this one's called Night Watch, Greenwood Furnace. The horses can't read in this hellish light. Who could? In this red flush at midnight that seeps in at the edges of dreams, grown so familiar to the sleepers that it leaves no impression when they wake. The horses doze, return to stalls from harness and traces. The charcoal wagons emptied, the ore wagons emptied, the filler now at the furnace mouth, counting measures to pour down into the heat. He streaks crimson into the sky as each wheelbarrow load slides down into the fire, sweat daubing his shirt onto his back, his handkerchief to his cheeks, thin divide between his lungs and hell, between him and a light like Armageddon, beginning in this valley, here along the familiar whistling stream. The filler's wife will tell stories about that light as an old woman living in a city. We'll call it bright enough to read a newspaper at midnight. She never did. She will forget the sour tang that lingered in her mouth most mornings. And her husband, the filler, he will die remembering aloud the night sparks flew up into the sky and then fell down again unceasingly, a rain of impossible, unending streaks, so that he knew Satan's armies fought the Lord. And he threw himself down there beside the tunnel mouth to pray and cry aloud. Stars fell through the night. His wife woke in the morning and called him a fool. The horses again accepted the harness and traces, the weight of charcoal and embarrassment, ears pricked to follow the angels still moving across the valley. The next poem is called The Woodcutter, and what a lot of these historical focused poems do is think about particular people whose lives were kind of the main thing that was going on. They were the main people doing the work, but they weren't necessarily the people that were producing records and that are kind of remembered when you visit these different historical sites or when you look up the history of them. For the most part, the Iron Masters, the people who are kind of at the top of the enterprise, are the people that there's a lot of information about. But for every one Iron Master at a furnace, there was a whole host of people down beneath them actually doing all of this labor. So in writing this book and when I moved to Pennsylvania trying to understand this place, I did a lot of research into these sort of particular types of people or particular lives, so that I could try to then imagine where there weren't examples of specific people, I could then imagine what life might have been like for them. So this next poem is titled The Woodcutter, and it steps into one of those kind of silent places and imagines that life. The Woodcutter. Her hands marked with the darkness left by smoke from kitchen fires. She takes the axe, the bread, and soft white cheese and folds of cloth and heads into the woods. Her eldest, clothed in calico, will tend the younger children while she swings that blade through oak and elm. The hours fall to the song she hears, low thrum of axe through air that conjures flour or mackerel, goods for every cord stacked up. Her muscles not with effort, strong enough to down these trees or darn socks, stitch a quilt to keep out cold. She warms with every blow. Her body fills the space between the trees, stretches to meet the sky she's opened, her children's lifted hands. So for women in these communities, women particularly that were widowed, one of the kind of few options left to them to provide for their families was this work of woodcutting. So it was interesting to me, it was just kind of a footnote in a book, but it was interesting to imagine this one possibility for women to make ends meet and to do this actually really challenging physical labor in this time. So for the next one, I am going to share my screen with you because it's a poem that looks interesting on the page. So here we go. So even if it's probably pretty small on your screen. But so this one's called The Record Keeper. And a lot of the record of this kind of work was kept in these big books where they would mark who was there, what hours they had been there. And then along the right-hand column, there was a tiny little space where kind of notes about the day were written. And in reading through these notes, it was really interesting to find that a lot of the things were really mundane, but kind of thrown into the mix were these pretty major happenings that you just got a few words to describe what it was. But so just so you can enjoy the way this one looks, here it is on the screen. This is the record keeper. Each day I slash through every square across the blue-lined page to mark our lives passing in the casting shed or charcoal house. The dates stacked to the left, the workers' names along the top, encase our hours, ensure our pay. But to the right, I loose a ragged edge. Stacked coal in coal house, Mason's finished work. James Kensel married Margaret Boaz. Snow. Balloon ascends from Belfont. White broke hand. Rain, 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 rain. All hands at work on dam. Forge idle, highest water known for years. Joseph Watson buried, hearth put in, ore received from Hecla, furnace blown. My hand writes it all the same. Election day, Soul's cabin burnt, Fulton child drowned. 2 inches, all I have. Read my words, see my only act of keeping in a burning world. So all of those italicized bits in that one are all of those kind of things that are written down. Those are real things that I pulled out of different records. But so it gives you a sense of the real range of what was being recorded. So the next poem will turn towards animals and the role that they played in these communities as well, which is again, providing essential work and really being part of that community. This is called Team. Pity the mules that labor beneath the sweet, thin sound of bells. The harness leather dulls the late morning light, even as the bells shine and glimmer. Pity those mules that love the weight of the oar. Pity yourself for thinking they might love it, that they might lull themselves to a trance, ears cupped to hold in the bell's songs. Pity yourself, you who hear them as songs. In the wagons, the earth tries to settle itself back into balance. It smooths and soothes itself. It does nothing but allow gravity in, corrector of all the upturned, moving things. Corrector of the men walking beside the mules and their thin, sweet cries. Correcting the dust hidden in the folds beside the mouth, beside the eye, hidden beneath hair. Can you pity them? You who haven't seen the road in the moments before the wagon's rumble turned presence. You who are and are not earth. You with lungs like silver. So we'll kind of turn there away a little bit from the past in Pennsylvania. We'll kind of move into the present in Pennsylvania and the present speaker or me kind of trying to understand. This is reading the landscape. Don't lose it. The ink line of Tussey Mountain's height unspools above this Pennsylvania valley, a loose wave of attention pooling from a pen. It flows out above corn tassels, branching maples, edges closer to the road you drive with every quarter mile. Like a script style whose spindled lines and whirls the world left behind. The mountain holds meaning at bay, keeps you tracing its outline, flickering behind tulip trees, lost to the curve of the road across the valley floor. This country baffles you. The maze of ridges drinks attention, masks distance, hems you in and eludes you. But the road calls you forward. The ridgeline rises up to meet you, just when you thought it gone. Passage. The river has picked itself up, walked up into the sky, with feet that crush the oaks and white pines against the ridges. The river in the sky wants to unlatch every window. It feels itself slowed there, turned to glass. It remembers the riverbed crush of sand and pebbles rolling along against its electric skin. The river shakes open the air, a horse through with the mud on its flanks, heaving off every clinging thickness it has passed through. In the sky, the river breaks open the ridges, cuts gaps from this world to the next. All our ghosts move along the valley in the living river. All our houses give way to their remembered hands, again on the doors, the basement walls. The sky, a river, has reached the charcoal flat, perfect rounded scar in the woods, and just another ridge away, the old growth. A hornet's nest has brought it to this encircled openness, the vaulted space shaped by rain scissoring the canopy. Spirit lantern lit but caught. The hornet's gone for years. The nest, a closed world still. So now we'll actually move back to Arizona. We'll kind of move to thinking about what all of this means, these kind of same themes, and taking them back into the present and kind of wrestling with what it means to return again to a place. So although this is a book about an industry that's really based in fire, there's actually a lot of water in this book, or many instances of rivers. So the next poem is called Rivers of Arizona. And it's a poem that I had been trying to write for quite a while and could never really get to come together. And then finally, one time when I was in Bisbee, actually, after hiking along the San Pedro River, the poem finally came together after that experience. So although it's not a poem that necessarily talks about Bisbee, for me, it's really rooted in Bisbee and along the San Pedro. So this is another one that is shaped interestingly. So I'm going to share my screen with you one more time. Go. Again, it'll be pretty tiny, but just to give you the sense that it's a poem that has a river running down the center of it. Rivers of Arizona. This story ends in moonlight, the riverbed flooded with it, a flat glint off the muddy trickle down the center. These rivers of my childhood speak the language of light, midday sun or moonglow, filling them more often than rainwater, which fades out, dries out, goes underground into the sandy soil. These rivers should teach us about borders. They cross paperless, cottonwoods bursting out, money green alongside. Lined in concrete, my childhood rivers are forced into a channel, so similar to charnel, bone dry, pumped, nothing left. When the rivers flood in Tucson, traffic stops. I've known women who take their children to see the water running, muddy and strong as anything free. I've known men hunkered in the bushes upstream from the wastewater recharge plant shooting ducks, a blue ripple off a wing, now pinned to their wall at home. Trash traces the line of the riverbeds. Thousands of bats bed down beneath a bridge. At dusk, a stream of them curling up like smoke or like water, seeking a path across dry ground. We'll escape, river to river on a raft, the German POWs planned. U-boat sailors shipped to the desert. They sought a way out through what they thought they knew best. Water unto water until the sea. And they did escape the camp. They dug through our hard soil. They walked through the night and found only moonlight between the banks. What did they do? What do we do except surrender to the light which marks the paths of what we crave most? So that story at the end about the German POWs, that is a real thing that happened outside of Phoenix, if you've never come across that story before. But I had wanted to put that in a poem for years, and it really took some time before I found all those other pieces to go with it. So I thank Bisbee for its contribution to that poem. Let's see the time. All right, so the next one is Final Descent into Phoenix. I could believe the world broke along straight lines. How could I not after seeing Full Night, my home from above, city where every light shines? My life's pattern, the square intersection defines the grid of streets, the streets, my line of sight. My eyes learned the world broke along straight lines of subdivision and future subdivision, signs clustered from the low 300s, close, despite foreclosed homes where nothing ever shines. I have believed this place is hell, the mines and dams churning unseen, the salt river a site for drunkenness, sharp glass, staggering lines for lost key locksmiths. I'd swear this city resigns itself from history for the love of freeways, for the fight to be first and enjoying now, moment where light shines to erase the darkness. And I love to see it, signs and street lights glittering orange beneath me, candle bright and inviting, brake lights leading me in straight lines home, city that consumes itself, city that even still shines. So the next one is a poem that is actually about Bisbee or thinks about Bisbee. You'll hear references to it. So some of my family history is related to coal mining in central Pennsylvania. And I had never really been to Pennsylvania before I was an adult, before I really went back for school. But I had family history in the region and I had family living there. And so in being in Pennsylvania, visiting the places that my family was from was part of what I did. So we visited, my husband and I visited the mine town that my family had come from that was now a lot of open pit mining, and that in many ways reminded me of Bisbee, but without kind of the hopefulness of the new life that Bisbee has found in different ways. But so this poem, hopefully the things that are about Bisbee are accurate. As somebody who doesn't live there, that's always a worry. But again, Bisbee's a place that I love, and I hope you'll feel the connections there. This is voluntary remediation. My great-grandparents' garage folds itself flat as a sheet. That garage at the patch folds itself neat into a suitcase and walks away while the house and everything else go to hell. In my dream, the house at the coal patch sinks into the ground while the raw-sided ridges spout backhoes, crushed earth opening up, sliding into the valleys that deepen into pits obscured behind oak trees. I can't recall their names, those mountains or my mine worker great-grandfather. I can't recall what year coal production ceased in Mount Carmel, or if it has. At what distance does a dream become memory? At what depth does memory stop its slow seepage through the soil? At what depth does contamination cease to linger, not of dreams, but of acid rain from the smelters outside Bisbee, another mine town I want to love? It's settled, my love or arsenic, among desert tree roots, slenderest highways. At what depth does home cease? Does the yard exceed the requirements for voluntary soil remediation, for the teams of men who truck in from El Paso to dig up and replace beloved shrubs, flowers, property value? On average, a foot. Backhoes scrape out and change. The shallow ground as easy to move in Arizona as Pennsylvania. A yard as simple to replace as a company-owned house. Sunlight can look so cheerful on the hood of a clean, white pickup. I can believe the men are honest, who dig up and replace the yards, who have hauled entire houses across Bisbee to save them from the widened pit. I can believe they saved that sky blue garage. My dreams, like hands cupping creek water, have held the street slope past Mount Carmel's firehouse, the light flaking metallic off a bridge leading into that town we've almost all left. A coal-colored dirt, the rust-colored copper dirt, the two-lane curving outside Mount Carmel or outside Bisbee blur through my dreams. Alongside that first shock, the deep time of the earth opened up, turned up iridescent, turned up putrid. Through it all, a shovel blade goes on searching, goes on toward the edge, that fault line humming beneath my nights. The good year. That was the year I found webs bridging roof and power line, mesquite branch and brick, filigree across every open space on my porch. And all those spiders, so delicate among the strands, wincing back, nervous, timorous at the slam the screen door makes. That year back in the desert, I rushed to a job I almost quit weekly, while the sky grew whiter and emptier every month. Vast, shallow plain like the shore end of the ocean, but pinned in place, every shiver restrained. At 19, on a beach, I had discovered that black band on the horizon at nightfall, where ocean and sky blur into the deepest intimation of emptiness. It opened so unexpectedly, that possibility of no satisfaction. Ahead in that flat year alone in an office in Tucson, that year, instead of wildfire, green flushed the mountainsides, outrageous, weird blush applied too enthusiastically. And the color, hue of a dry country in which the eye perceives something held back, some wavelength suppressed or grayed out. But what remains turns brilliant, translucent, lit from the inside, stained glass seen for the first time in darkness, coloring the night, even when I look away. So when I did move back to Tucson, I found it really difficult. For all that moving to Pennsylvania was hard, coming back was also really hard, leaving a place that I had come to know. I also came back to kind of a challenging work situation that was not the Poetry Center, but so some of these poems deal with that a little bit. But so I'll just read a couple more. We're almost at the end of our time. But so this one is called She Dreams About the Exodus. And it is a true thing that happened to me at my first place of work when I returned from Pennsylvania. She dreams about the Exodus. Best day ever. Everyone sent home from work by lunchtime because of the ants. They poured out of the vents, dropped around the edges of the ceiling tiles, glossy black with plastic wrap wings. Oh, but the West, will anyone want to live there in 20 years when the waters run out? Tell me about your thirst, and I'll tell you about mine. We had been talking about high desert magic, the way light bleeds away at evening, the wind-lengthened lines of plants, the watercolor gradations of distance. Would I give it up? The ants ended up in drawers and boxes of paper behind every desk leg in the corners of the lunchroom. Nothing to do but wait for them to die, the mating swarm mobbing our vents by mistake, maybe drawn to the water pooled on our roof from the monsoon the night before. They're looking for a damp place, the pest control people said, a new colony. The monsoon seemed changed when I moved back to Arizona. Less windborne dust, less biblical plague. When God told Moses and Aaron to turn the dust into gnats, what did the dust think? Nowhere damp to go, their shimmering little wings forgotten, every ant nearly dead by the time they poured down into our office. Afterward, I saw globules of ants churning above the sidewalk on muggy summer mornings, shape-shifting like soap bubbles. Tell me about your thirst, and I'll tell you about the ants. Someone vacuumed up the piles, dark little granules of earth stuck in the overhead lights ever after. There might still be some in that building, who knows? It was gross. I hope nobody ever has that experience. It was very memorable. So I'm going to read the last poem in the book, which is titled Self-Portrait with Tucson. It's a poem that starts with an epigraph from Ophelia Zepeda, from a poem of hers titled Autumn Dances. And it also incorporates the quote from her at the end of the poem. The quote at the end that you'll hear is, "There's still a little bit of night left." And in her poem, which is about the process of the Tohono O'odham community calling back the rains through ceremony and through song, the thought is that in the middle of the night, the cry is that there's still time left for us to do this good work of calling the rain back. So that's what this is gesturing towards at the end. Also, just go read Ophelia Zepeda. She's one of my favorites. Self-Portrait with Tucson. This is the way we begin and end things. Ophelia Zepeda. One day I saw the mountain of God descending across the valley. Sunlight alive in the body of snow, stepping through the veins of ponderosa and granite, cracking the air balanced between. valley in my mouth when I mean city, when I should say brick, tile, wash with abandoned couch, ocean always just beyond sight, power lines crossing between that mountain and me. You should know I am a woman who believes in visions, uncurtained glass after sunset, a mirror and the cooled, vast ceilings it harbors, certainty of memory that wakes me in the salt light before daybreak. By the road, a man shaped circles that connect mouth and stomach, prophet's unwashed hair and empty bag. We are not coming to a mountain of fear, but a mountain of joy, a place sweet and yellow as San Javier watermelon. I did not know myself when I returned home from my long journey. Sometime I see the Lord's mountain electric pink and close in the rear view, and I know there is still a little bit of night left in me. So I think I will actually end there. Thank you all so much for being here to hear those poems. Like I said, it's really a treat to get to read them to you again, and I'm just so grateful to get to be here and to share this work with you. So thank you so much. And Allison, again, thank you so much for your time and for inviting me.
Thank you, Julie. What a delight. And I definitely feel like it's been a year waiting to hear your poetry read here for us in this community. And I'm hoping if anybody does have any questions or comments, we could take a couple minutes. You can unmute yourselves. One thing I am so appreciative, having read this book several times, is something that, Arizona was a shock to me, coming born and raised in California and then living in New York City for many years, 15, 16 years. And I think that the desert is a real subtle beauty. You have to get used to it. You have to live through the seasons in a different way. And monsoon especially, I think, is the secret of the desert. But also the oppression of the heat, especially in your poem, Phoenix, Arizona. And, I've never lived in Phoenix, but I have been there and in that amazing heat. And yet finding the beauty in it, these poisonous creatures and these prickly plants and yet this wonder and amazement of it. And you really capture that intricacy so well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was one of the things that I realized when I was kind of finished with the book is that there are a lot of animals in it, both in Pennsylvania and in those Arizona poems as well. And I think about, I always love the fact with the Sonoran Desert that it's one of the most biodiverse. It's either one of the most, or I think it might be the most biodiverse desert in the world. And so when you think about it, it's such a difficult landscape in many ways, or a difficult climate. It's also one where this amazing array of animals and plants have really found their niche and found a way to thrive within that framework. So it was interesting to come back and think about animals throughout the process of writing the book.
Absolutely. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? I'm just waiting to see if there is an unmute. Well, you have an open invitation at the Copper Queen Library. Please.
Hello.
Oh, hi. Who is this?
This is Julie's dad.
Oh,
Hi, Dad.
I just want, the readings were glorious, I should say. What stuck out to me was the German U-boat commander escaping to the Gila and finding no water. And also your references to Mount Carmel.
thank you.
That
Yeah,
was a childhood favorite, yes.
thank you. Yeah, no, the U-boat, I'm sure that was like something I probably watched with you about that, the Great Escape it's near Papago Park, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and to imagine that these German prisoners said, okay, here's a blue line on the map. I know how I'm getting out of here.
Well, they dug from the camp with their collapsible rafts to a SRP canal and went down to the salt and then to the Gila and realized there was no water.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating story, and just to imagine like that they're like, you know, we're out of here, we figured it out, and then to not know the reality of desert rivers is not at all what they were imagining. So
No.
yeah,
And your references to Mount Carmel brought back a lot of memories too. So
oh, I'm glad. Yeah, thank
that
you.
was my mother's hometown. So
And
thank you.
Arizona does have some remarkable history. Our community, our patrons love local and Arizona history. And we actually did recently have a presentation on that Great Escape. And
Oh, wow.
it was fascinating and remarkable. And then to hear the threads of that story woven into a poem referencing that was really powerful too, because it is a reminder of um, the the remarkable history of this landscape and of this community. So
Okay.
and
Yeah.
also thanks to your mom and dad for being here. I really like to thank the parents of artists and poets. We know, we recognize you, we see you parents. It is a remarkable thing to have a child artist. I have one myself.
Well, thank you again, and thank you all so much for being here. And I hope for those of you that are in Bisbee, or even if you're not in Bisbee, I hope you get to visit the Copper Queen soon. I was in Bisbee earlier this month and was able to get a tour from Allison, and it's just it's such an amazing library. It's a beautiful building. They put up some really neat wallpaper around the bathrooms. That's historic photos. So go check it out. It's just, there's so many good things there. So I'm really grateful to get to read for all of you tonight.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. And thank you everybody for joining us.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening.